The padlock clicked open with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for her. Maya rolled up the metal door, and the musty smell of old canvas and turpentine hit her immediately. Her heart sank. The storage unit was smaller than she'd hoped, maybe 10 by 12 feet, and crammed with what looked like the remnants of someone's abandoned art career. Canvases leaned against each other in dusty rows, their backs turned to her like ashamed children. A few easels stood collapsed in the corner beside boxes of dried paint tubes and brushes stiff with age. "Mom?" Emma's voice carried from the car, thin and worried. "Is it good stuff?" Maya forced brightness into her voice. "Still looking, baby. Give me a few minutes." She pulled out her phone's flashlight and stepped inside, her sneakers squelching against the concrete floor. The paintings were mostly landscapes, mountains, forests, seascapes rendered in heavy oils with more enthusiasm than skill. Amateur work, the kind she'd seen 100 times in her community center classes. Her stomach twisted. Even at a garage sale, these might bring $5 or $10 each. Rain pounded harder against the roof, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled across the Portland sky. Maya pulled out the first few canvases, examining them in the weak light filtering through the doorway. Sunset over Mount Hood, a cabin by a lake, a field of wildflowers that looked like it had been painted with a butter knife. She was 3 rows deep when she found it. The painting was different from the others, smaller, maybe 16 by 20 inches, and oddly heavy for its size. The image itself was unremarkable, a simple mountain landscape with a winding trail disappearing into dark pines. But something about it made her pause. The brushwork was more confident here, the colors richer, and unlike the others, this one was professionally framed in what looked like expensive carved wood. Maya lifted it carefully, surprised again by its weight. The frame felt solid, substantial, maybe mahogany or walnut. Even if the painting was worthless, the frame alone might be worth something. "Find anything good?" Maya spun around to find Mrs. Patterson, the storage facility manager, standing in the doorway with an umbrella. The older woman's eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, and she was looking at the painting in Maya's hands with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. "Just some old artwork," Maya said, suddenly feeling protective of her purchase. "Nothing special." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "That unit's been here almost 15 years. Owner stopped paying, stopped returning calls. We tried to track down family, but—" She shrugged. "Amazing what people leave behind. Do you remember the owner's name?" "Chen, I think. Or Chang. Something Chinese." Mrs. Patterson's gaze lingered on Maya's face. "Come to think of it, you look a little— I better get going." Maya's pulse quickened in a way she didn't understand. "My daughter's waiting." She gathered an armload of the most promising canvases and hurried back to the car, the heavy landscape clutched against her chest. Emma looked up from her math homework as Maya slid into the driver's seat, water dripping from her hair. "How many did you get?" "About 20. Maya tried to sound optimistic as she arranged the paintings in the back seat. "We'll clean them up, maybe reframe a few. Could be worth a couple $100. Emma's face brightened. "Enough for rent?" Maya's heart clenched. 8 years old, and Emma already knew too much about their financial struggles. "We'll see, sweetheart. Let's get home and take a better look." As Maya started the engine, she caught Mrs. Patterson watching them from the office doorway. The woman raised one hand in what might have been a wave, but her expression remained thoughtful, almost concerned. Their apartment was a cramped one-bedroom in southeast Portland, but Maya had made it warm with thrift store finds and Emma's artwork covering every available wall. She spread the paintings across their small living room floor while Emma heated leftover soup for dinner. Most were exactly what she'd expected, well-meaning but unremarkable. But as she cleaned the dust from the heavy landscape, she noticed something odd. The back of the frame had a small gap where the wood had warped slightly, and when she pressed against it, she could feel something shift inside. "Mom, soup's ready." "Coming." Maya set the painting aside, but her eyes kept returning to it throughout dinner. There was something about that frame, something that didn't quite fit. After Emma went to bed, Maya sat cross-legged on the living room floor with the landscape in her lap. In the lamplight, she could see the brushstrokes more clearly, confident, purposeful marks that suggested real skill. This wasn't amateur work at all. She ran her fingers along the frame's edges, feeling for loose spots. At the bottom corner, the wood gave slightly under pressure. Her heart began to race as she realized what she was feeling. The frame had been designed to open. Maya's hands trembled as she traced the frame's edge again, confirming what she'd felt. A hidden mechanism, subtle but deliberate. She glanced toward Emma's closed bedroom door, listening for any stirring, then looked back at the painting in her lap. Not tonight. She was too tired, too overwhelmed to process whatever she might find. The last thing she needed was another complication in her already chaotic life. She wrapped the landscape carefully in an old towel and placed it on top of her dresser, then fell into bed still wearing yesterday's clothes. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept cycling through the same anxious loop that had become her nightly routine. Rent due in 6 days, Emma's shoes wearing through at the toes, the gas bill sitting unopened on the kitchen counter. The alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like every weekday. Maya rolled out of bed, muscles aching from yesterday's stress, and began the familiar choreography of their morning routine. Coffee first, the cheap kind that tasted like burnt water but contained enough caffeine to function. Then Emma's lunch, peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, the last of the string cheese. "Morning, sunshine," Maya whispered, gently shaking Emma's shoulder. Her daughter stirred, dark hair fanning across the pillow like spilled ink. Emma had inherited her grandmother's delicate features and her mystery father's height, but her stubborn chin was pure Maya. "5 more minutes," Emma mumbled. "School waits for no one. Come on. I made chocolate chip pancakes." Emma's eyes opened suspiciously. "We don't have chocolate chips." "Fine, regular pancakes. But I cut them into fun shapes." "What shapes?" "Pancake shapes." Emma giggled despite herself, and Maya felt the familiar tug of fierce love mixed with desperate fear. What if she couldn't provide for this perfect little person? What if she failed at the one thing that mattered most? They caught the bus at 7:15, Emma's backpack held together with duct tape and determination. Maya watched through the grimy window as her daughter found a seat next to her best friend Zoe, their heads immediately bent together in animated conversation. For those precious 8 hours, Emma would be just another kid, insulated from the reality of overdue notices and empty cupboards. Maya's first job was cleaning offices downtown, a gig that paid $12 an hour and required her to be invisible. She moved through corporate spaces like a ghost, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces while early arrivals pretended she didn't exist. The work was mindless but necessary. It paid for groceries and kept the lights on. Her phone buzzed as she finished the 3rd floor. A text from the community center. "Can you cover Sarah's 2 p.m. class? She's sick. $40. Maya's heart lifted slightly. $40 meant they could splurge on actual meat for dinner instead of another pasta night. She typed back quickly, "Yes, thanks." Teaching art was supposed to be her real job, the thing she'd gone to college for back when she believed in dreams and 5-year plans. Now it was just another hustle. Scattered part-time hours at community centers and after-school programs. But when she stood in front of a classroom, watching students discover they could create something beautiful with their own hands, she remembered who she used to be. The afternoon class was a mix of retirees and young mothers, all seeking something they couldn't quite name. Maya set up still lifes with fruit and wine bottles, guiding them through basic composition while her mind wandered to the hidden frame sitting on her dresser. Maya? Mrs. Rodriguez, one of her regular students, was holding up her canvas with pride. "How's this?" The painting was technically flawed but full of heart. Exactly the kind of work Maya used to dismiss before life taught her humility. "It's wonderful," she said, and meant it. "Look how the light catches the apple. You're really seeing it." Mrs. Rodriguez beamed, and Maya felt the familiar pang of what if. What if she'd stuck with her own art instead of getting pregnant at 26? What if Emma's father hadn't vanished the moment she'd told him the news? What if her mother hadn't died of cancer when Emma was barely 2, taking all their family history with her? But those thoughts led nowhere good. She had Emma, and that was enough. It had to be. Maya picked up Emma at aftercare, listening to her chatter about a science project on volcanoes while they rode the bus home. Their apartment felt smaller after being away all day, the walls pressing closer with each bill and worry. Emma settled at the kitchen table with homework, while Maya heated leftover soup again. "Mom?" Emma looked up from her math worksheet. "Jessica's mom said we might have to move soon. Are we going to move?" Maya's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "Why would Jessica's mom say that?" "She heard you talking to Mrs. Kim about rent." The apartment building's thin walls had always been a problem, but Maya hadn't realized her 8-year-old neighbor was listening. She sat down across from Emma, choosing her words carefully. "We might have to find somewhere new," she admitted. "But wherever we go together. That's what matters." Emma nodded solemnly, then returned to her homework. Maya watched her daughter's bent head and felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders. Later, after Emma was asleep, Maya found herself staring at the wrapped painting again. Maya unwrapped the painting with deliberate care, her fingers finding the warped corner of the frame as if drawn by magnetic force. The apartment's silence felt heavy around her, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and Emma's soft breathing from the bedroom. She pressed gently against the wood, feeling it give way with a soft click. Her heart hammered as a narrow section of the frame's bottom edge swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a shallow compartment lined with what looked like oiled cloth. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and something else, a small, tarnished key on a length of black cord. Maya's hands shook as she lifted out the paper. It felt fragile, as if it might crumble at her touch. She unfolded it carefully under the lamp's warm glow, revealing handwriting in faded blue ink. The script was elegant but hurried, as if written under pressure. "My dearest granddaughter, if you are reading this, then fate has finally brought you to what I could never give you in life, the truth about who we are and what we owe to the past." Maya's vision blurred. "Granddaughter?" She read the words again, certain she'd misunderstood. Her mother had always insisted they had no family, no history beyond the 2 of them. Maya had grown up believing she was essentially an orphan, her father unknown, her maternal grandparents long dead. "My name is David Chen, and I am your grandfather, though I was never permitted to know you. Your mother, my daughter Li Ming, whom you knew as Linda, had good reasons for cutting ties with me, reasons born from fear and necessity." Maya's breath caught. Her mother's name had been Linda, but she'd never mentioned anything about it being shortened or changed. Never mentioned a father named David. Never mentioned having reasons to fear anyone. "I was not always the man I became, but the choices I made during the war, choices I believed were righteous, have cast a long shadow over our family. I helped people escape, Maya. Jewish families fleeing the Nazi regime, making their way through routes that began in Canada and ended in safety. I thought I was doing God's work." The letter continued, the handwriting becoming more erratic. "But some of the people I trusted were not who they claimed to be. Money changed hands. Money that was not mine to take, belonging to families who had already lost everything. I thought I was holding it for safekeeping, but when the war ended and I tried to return it, those families had vanished. Scattered or worse. Others came looking, dangerous people who believe the money belongs to them now. They have searched for decades, Maya, and they will not stop. I have hidden what remains in a place only family can find, protected by a secret your grandmother taught me. But I am old now, and sick, and time is running out." Maya turned the page, her pulse racing. "The key will open a safety deposit box at First National Bank, branch 447. Inside you will find a map and further instructions. But know this, once you begin this journey, there is no turning back. These people have long memories and longer reach. They killed your grandmother when she refused to tell them where I had gone. They have never stopped watching our family." The room felt like it was tilting. Maya gripped the edge of her coffee table, struggling to process what she was reading. Her grandmother had been killed. Her mother had lived under some kind of threat. I pray you are strong, granddaughter. I pray you have inherited your grandmother's courage and your mother's wisdom. The coordinates below will lead you to where everything waits. Enough to change your life, but at a cost I could never bring myself to pay. The debt must be settled one way or another. I leave that choice to you. With love and regret, David Chen, March 15th, 1943. Below the signature were GPS coordinates and a rough hand-drawn map showing what looked like mountain terrain with an X marked near a structure labeled cabin. Maya set the letter down with trembling hands and reached for the key. It was small and old-fashioned, the kind that might open a lockbox or safe. The black cord felt smooth, worn by decades of handling. She stared at the coordinates, recognizing the general area, somewhere in the Cascade Mountains, maybe 3 hours' drive from Portland, remote, isolated, the kind of place where people went to disappear, or to hide something. A soft sound from Emma's room made Maya freeze, just her daughter turning over in sleep, but it snapped her back to reality. She looked around their cramped apartment, at the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, at Emma's worn shoes by the door. Enough to change your life. But dangerous people were involved. People who had apparently killed her grandmother, who had been searching for her family for decades. People who might still be watching. Maya folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the frame's hidden compartment along with the key. Tomorrow she had to work, had to pretend everything was normal while she decided what to do with this impossible information. She had 6 days to make rent, and now she had what might be either salvation or destruction hidden in her bedroom. The choice, as her grandfather had written, was hers. Maya sat frozen on her living room floor, staring at the painting as if it might suddenly reveal more secrets. The letter's words echoed in her mind. Dangerous people killed your grandmother, long memories and longer reach. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to massage away the headache building behind her eyes. This was insane, absolutely insane. She was a single mother who taught art classes and cleaned office buildings, not some treasure hunter from a movie. The smart thing, the only rational thing, was to put everything back where she'd found it and pretend this night had never happened. But the coordinates glowed in her memory like a neon sign, and her grandfather's words whispered seductively, "Enough to change your life." Maya stood abruptly and walked to the kitchen window, peering through the blinds at the dark street below. A car sat parked under the broken streetlight. Had it been there yesterday? She couldn't remember. Her heart rate spiked as paranoia crept through her thoughts like poison. Was someone already watching? Had her discovery somehow triggered an alarm she couldn't see? "Stop it," she whispered to herself. "You're being ridiculous." But her mother's face floated before her eyes. Linda Chen, who had worked double shifts at the hospital and never talked about her childhood, who had flinched whenever Maya asked about grandparents or extended family, who had insisted on keeping their apartment door double-locked and had taught Maya to check the peepholes before answering. Lessons that had seemed like urban paranoia but now felt ominous. Maya returned to the living room and picked up the letter again, scanning for details she might have missed. March 15th, 1943. That made her grandfather, a young man during World War II, probably in his 20s when he wrote this. If he'd been involved in refugee smuggling, if money had gone missing, if people had died. She thought about Emma's math homework abandoned on the kitchen table, about the parent-teacher conference scheduled for next week, about the normalcy of their small, predictable life. Taking this seriously would mean stepping into something vast and dangerous, something that had already cost her grandmother's life. What if following those coordinates led these mysterious watchers straight to Emma? But what if it didn't? What if her grandfather's treasure was real, and she was one bank visit away from never worrying about rent again? Emma could have new shoes, could go to a better school, could have the childhood Maya desperately wanted to give her but couldn't afford. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her landlord, rent reminder, 5 days remaining. Late fees apply after the 1st. 5 days, not 6. Maya's stomach clenched as she realized she'd miscounted. 5 days to find $800, or they'd be homeless. The math was brutal and simple. Her cleaning job would bring in maybe $200 over the next 5 days, and she had one art class scheduled. Even if she sold every painting from the storage unit, which was unlikely, she'd still be short. She walked to Emma's bedroom door and cracked it open, watching her daughter's peaceful face in the dim hallway light. Emma had inherited Maya's stubborn streak, but also her grandmother's gentle nature. Linda Chen, who had died too young from cancer, leaving Maya with 1,000 unasked questions and no family left in the world. Except apparently that had been a lie. Maya had a grandfather, or had once had one. A man who claimed to love her but had never tried to contact her, who had hidden his existence behind secrets and fear. Why should she trust someone who had let her mother struggle alone, who had allowed Maya to grow up believing she was completely alone in the world? But then again, what choice did she have? In 5 days, the eviction process would begin. Emma would learn that their life was even more precarious than she'd suspected. They'd end up in some motel or shelter, and Maya would have to explain to her 8-year-old daughter that sometimes good mothers still failed to keep their children safe. Maya closed Emma's door softly and returned to the painting. She traced the hidden compartment's edges with one finger, marveling at the craftsmanship. Someone had spent considerable time and skill creating this hiding place. Her grandfather had been planning for this moment, preparing for the day when his secret would be discovered by family. The key felt warm in her palm, as if it carried decades of hope and desperation. First National Bank, branch 447. She could look that up, drive by, see if it even existed. That wasn't committing to anything dangerous, just gathering information. But Maya knew herself well enough to recognize rationalization when she heard it. One step would lead to another and another, until she was standing in some remote mountain cabin with her daughter's life hanging in the balance. She wrapped the painting carefully and placed it back on her dresser, but kept the letter and key on her nightstand. Tomorrow, she would think more clearly, would weigh the risks against the rewards like a responsible adult. Tonight, though, she lay awake, calculating how much gas money it would take to reach the Cascade Mountains and whether Emma's car seat would fit in a rental vehicle if their old Honda broke down on mountain roads. Maya woke before her alarm, the letter's words still burning in her mind like a fever dream. She'd managed perhaps 2 hours of restless sleep, her dreams filled with shadowy figures and mountain roads that led nowhere. The morning light streaming through her bedroom window felt different somehow, sharper, more urgent, as if the world had shifted overnight. She dressed quietly and made Emma breakfast, going through the familiar motions while her thoughts churned. Her daughter chattered about a field trip to the Science Museum, oblivious to the storm building in Maya's head. "Can you give me lunch money today instead of packing?" Emma asked, swinging her legs from the kitchen chair. "They have pizza on Fridays." "Sure, honey." Maya handed her a $5 bill she couldn't really spare, but Emma's smile made it worth the sacrifice. Normal. She could give her daughter normal for a few more hours. After Emma left for school, Maya sat at her laptop and typed First National Bank Branch 447 into the search engine. Her heart hammered as the results loaded. There it was, a small branch in southeast Portland, tucked between a coffee shop and a used bookstore on Division Street. Real, tangible, a 20-minute drive from her apartment. She stared at the bank's address until the numbers blurred, then clicked on the street view. The building looked ordinary, unremarkable, beige brick with large windows, the kind of place she passed every day without thinking. But somewhere inside those walls waited a safety deposit box that might contain answers, or might contain nothing but disappointment and wasted hope. Maya's phone rang, making her jump. "Mrs. Kim from the community center." "Maya, dear, I hate to do this on short notice, but we need to cancel your afternoon class today." Pipe burst in the art room. "We'll reschedule next week, but you can't pay me." Maya finished the sentence, her voice hollow. "I'm so sorry. I know you're counting on this income." After hanging up, Maya calculated the damage. Without today's class, She was now $50 shorter than her already impossible goal. 5 days had become an absolute deadline with zero margin for error. She walked to her dresser and unwrapped the painting again, staring at the landscape as if it might speak. The brushwork was amateur but enthusiastic. Someone had painted this with love, not skill. Probably her grandfather, hiding his secrets behind a facade of artistic innocence. The hidden compartment opened at her touch, and she removed the key and letter. In daylight, the metal looked even more tarnished, the black cord frayed with age. But the weight of it felt significant, purposeful. This wasn't some elaborate hoax. Someone had gone to tremendous effort to preserve this moment, this choice. Maya grabbed her purse and car keys before she could talk herself out of it. The drive to the bank felt surreal, like sleepwalking through someone else's life. She parked across the street and sat in her Honda, engine ticking as it cooled, watching people enter and exit the building. Normal people conducting normal business, opening checking accounts, applying for loans, living lives uncomplicated by mysterious grandfathers and wartime secrets. She could still turn around, drive home, sell the paintings through normal channels, hope for the best, accept whatever came next with grace and dignity. But Emma's face floated in her mind, not sleeping peacefully this time, but crying as strangers loaded their possessions into boxes, asking why they had to leave their home. Maya had promised her daughter stability, safety, a childhood better than her own. Those promises hung in the balance now. Maya crossed the street and pushed through the bank's heavy glass doors. The interior was all polished marble and hushed efficiency. A security guard nodded as she passed, and Maya wondered if her guilty expression was visible to everyone. She approached the customer service desk, where a young woman with perfectly styled hair looked up expectantly. "I need to access a safety deposit box," Maya said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Of course. Do you have your key and identification?" Maya placed the tarnished key on the counter, watching the woman's eyebrows rise slightly at its appearance. "This box has been inactive for a while." "No problem. Let me look up the box number." The woman typed rapidly, then frowned at her screen. "Box 1943. That's interesting. This shows a very old registration," and she looked up with professional curiosity. "Are you Maya Chen?" "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. The account holder left specific instructions that only someone with that exact name and this key would be granted access. No exceptions, no proxies. "May I see your driver's license?" Maya handed over her ID with trembling fingers, watching as the woman compared it to her screen. This was it, the moment of no return. Once she opened that box, she would know the truth about her family's past, about the danger that had apparently been circling them for decades. "Everything checks out." "Right this way, Miss Chen." Maya followed her toward the vault, each step carrying her further from the life she'd known and closer to whatever her grandfather had left waiting in the dark. The vault's heavy door swung open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing walls lined with gleaming safety deposit boxes of various sizes. Maya's escort, whose nameplate read Jennifer, led her down a narrow corridor lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs. "Box 1943 is one of our oldest," Jennifer said conversationally, her heels clicking against polished concrete. "The rental was prepaid for 99 years. We don't offer that service anymore, but the contract is still valid." 99 years. Maya's grandfather had planned for this moment to outlive him by decades. The thought made her feel both protected and profoundly alone, loved by someone she'd never known existed. "Here we are." Jennifer stopped before a box at eye level, larger than Maya had expected. "I'll need both keys to open it." Maya watched as Jennifer inserted the bank's master key, then held out her hand expectantly. The moment stretched between them like a held breath. Maya's key slid into the second lock with a soft click that seemed to echo through the vault. "Take all the time you need," Jennifer said, sliding the metal box from its slot. "There's a private viewing room just around the corner. Press the call button when you're finished." Maya carried the box as if it contained explosives, her hands trembling slightly as she entered the small, windowless room. A single chair faced a narrow table. She set the box down and stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside could be anything: money, documents, answers to questions she'd never known to ask. Or it could be empty, a cruel joke played by a grandfather who'd abandoned his family. Only one way to find out. The lid lifted easily, revealing contents that made Maya's breath catch. Stacks of old bills wrapped in rubber bands sat beside a thick manila envelope and several small wooden boxes. But what dominated the space was a leather journal, its cover cracked with age. Maya picked up one stack of money with shaking fingers. The bills were old but real, 50s and 100s that smelled of time and secrets. She counted quickly, nearly $3,000 in the first stack alone. Her rent money, Emma's new shoes, groceries for months. But the manila envelope called to her more urgently. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, black and white images that seemed to whisper stories from another era. A young Asian man in a worn coat standing beside a train, families with suitcases and frightened eyes, children clutching dolls and looking over their shoulders. At the bottom of the envelope, Maya found a photograph that made her gasp, a wedding picture. The same young man, now in a simple suit, standing beside a beautiful woman in a modest white dress. On the back, someone had written, "David and Rose Chen, Vancouver, 1944. Her grandparents. Maya traced her grandmother's face with one finger, searching for resemblance, for some connection across the decades. Rose had delicate features and intelligent eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw that Maya recognized from her own mirror. The leather journal contained her grandfather's story in careful handwriting that grew more erratic as the entries progressed. Maya read about refugee routes through the Canadian wilderness, about families who paid everything they had for safe passage to freedom, about bribes and false papers and desperate nights hiding in abandoned cabins. But she also read about money that went missing, about trust betrayed and people who died because of his mistakes. Her grandfather's guilt bled through every word, decades of regret preserved in fading ink. January 12th, 1945. Rose thinks we should run, disappear into the wilderness and start over. She doesn't understand that running won't make the deaths my fault any less true. The Goldstein family trusted me, and now their children will never see another sunrise. March 3rd, 1945. They found us in Seattle. Rose barely escaped through the back window while I led them away. I can't endanger her anymore, can't risk the life growing inside her. Our daughter deserves better than a father who's hunted. Maya's mother, the baby her grandmother had been carrying, was Li Ming, Linda, who'd grown up believing her father was dead rather than dangerous. A soft knock on the viewing room door made Maya jump. "Miss Chen, are you all right in there?" "Fine," Maya called, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Just a few more minutes." She turned to the wooden boxes, opening each with careful fingers. The first contained jewelry, simple pieces that might have belonged to her grandmother. The second held documents, birth certificates, marriage licenses, immigration papers that told the story of a young couple building a life in the shadow of war. The third box nearly made her drop it. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a pistol and a small bag of bullets. Beside them lay a note in her grandfather's handwriting, "For protection only. They will not stop looking." Maya stared at the gun, her safe suburban life feeling suddenly fragile. This wasn't just about money or family history. Her grandfather had expected violence, had prepared for it. The people he'd warned about weren't just phantoms from the past. They were real enough that he'd armed his own granddaughter against them. She closed the box quickly and gathered everything back into the safety deposit box, her hands moving on autopilot. But she kept the journal, one stack of bills, and her grandparents' wedding photo. Evidence. Proof that this was all real. The choice her grandfather had left her felt heavier now, weighted with decades of blood and fear. Maya sat in her Honda outside the bank for 20 minutes. the leather journal burning against her lap like a live coal. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind, "They will not stop looking." The gun's weight seemed to press against her consciousness, even though she'd left it locked safely away. She forced herself to drive to Emma's school for pickup, going through the motions of normalcy while her world tilted on its axis. When Emma bounded into the car, chattering about her science project on volcanoes, Maya found herself scanning the parking lot for unfamiliar faces, cars that might be watching. "Mom, you're being weird," Emma said, buckling her seatbelt. "Why do you keep looking around like that?" "Just tired, honey." Maya pulled into traffic, checking her mirrors more frequently than usual. "How was your day?" But as Emma launched into a detailed account of lunch drama and math tests, Maya's attention fragmented. Every dark sedan looked suspicious. Every pedestrian who glanced their direction might be a threat. Her grandfather's paranoia was becoming her inheritance, passed down through blood and fear. At home, Maya spread the journal and photographs across her kitchen table while Emma worked on homework in her bedroom. The afternoon light fell across her grandparents' wedding picture, illuminating faces young and hopeful despite the war raging around them. They'd had no idea what their love would cost, what legacy they were creating for children not yet born. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the cleaning company. "Can you take an extra shift tomorrow?" Someone called out sick. Under normal circumstances, Maya would have jumped at the overtime. But tomorrow was Saturday. If she was going to follow those coordinates to the cabin, it would have to be on a weekend, when Emma could stay with Mrs. Rodriguez next door. The thought crystallized into decision before Maya could stop it. She was really going to do this. Drive into the mountains with a cryptic map and decades-old coordinates, chasing ghosts and family secrets that had already killed her grandmother. The responsible part of her mind screamed warnings, but the rent notice on her refrigerator spoke louder. Maya called her elderly neighbor, who agreed to watch Emma overnight without asking too many questions. Mrs. Rodriguez had been widowed for 10 years and seemed to enjoy the company. Emma adored her homemade tamales and endless supply of telenovelas. "I have to drive to Salem for a potential art sale," Maya told her, the lie sliding out smoothly. "Old paintings from an estate. Could be worth good money." "Of course, mija. Emma is always welcome here." As evening approached, Maya found herself studying the coordinates obsessively. 45 degree, 22, Phaeton, 121 degree. Led to a spot in the mounthood remote enough to hide secrets, close enough that her grandfather could have reached it regularly. The area would be snow-covered now, November in the mountains, but her Honda had good tires and she'd grown up driving in Oregon winters. She packed carefully, warm clothes, flashlight, the journal, and the wedding photograph. After long consideration, she also grabbed the kitchen knife from her cutting board. Not much protection, but better than nothing. Her grandfather's gun remained locked in the safety deposit box, too dangerous and unfamiliar for someone who'd never fired a weapon. Emma emerged from her room as Maya zipped her overnight bag. "Where are you going?" "Just a quick trip to look at some artwork. You're having a sleepover with Mrs. Rodriguez, remember? Can I bring my Nintendo?" "Of course." Maya hugged her daughter tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "I'll be back tomorrow night. Promise?" The word stuck in Maya's throat. Her grandfather had probably made similar promises to her grandmother, had sworn he'd return from dangerous missions that grew more perilous each time. "I promised to try my very best." Emma seemed satisfied with that answer, already mentally planning her evening of video games and Spanish soap operas. Later, after Emma was settled next door with her backpack and stuffed elephant, Maya sat alone in her apartment as darkness fell outside. The coordinates glowed on her phone screen. Tomorrow she would drive into the mountains following a map drawn by a dead man, searching for answers that might not exist. But tonight, she counted the money from the safety deposit box again. $3,000, enough to pay rent for 4 months and buy Emma winter clothes that actually fit. Real money, whatever its source. Her grandfather's guilt had become her salvation, his bloody legacy transformed into hope. Maya touched the wedding photograph one more time, tracing her grandmother's face in the dim light. Rose had chosen love despite the danger, had carried her daughter to safety even when it meant a lifetime of hiding. Tomorrow, Maya would discover whether she had inherited that same courage, or if fear would turn her back at the first sign of real danger. Maya woke before dawn, her body rigid with tension she couldn't shake. 3 hours of restless sleep had done nothing to quiet the voice in her head screaming that this was insane. Single mothers didn't chase family mysteries into remote mountains. They didn't follow 70-year-old maps to confront dangerous legacies. They stayed home, stayed safe, protected their children by avoiding exactly the kind of reckless adventure that had destroyed her grandfather's family. But the rent notice still hung on her refrigerator like a death sentence, and Emma still needed winter boots that didn't have holes in the soles. Maya dressed in layers: thermal underwear, jeans, wool sweater, waterproof jacket. The November morning was bitter, frost coating her Honda's windshield in crystalline warnings. She scraped ice with numb fingers, her breath forming clouds that dissipated into the grey pre-dawn sky. The drive began on familiar highways, Portland's early morning traffic providing a comforting illusion of normalcy. But as Maya turned east toward the mountains, civilization fell away like a discarded mask. The road narrowed, climbing through dense forests that pressed close on both sides. Ancient Douglas firs and towering pines created a green tunnel that swallowed her headlights, making noon feel like twilight. Her phone lost signal somewhere past government camp. The GPS became useless, leaving only her grandfather's hand-drawn map and increasingly primitive road signs. Maya's Honda climbed steadily, engine straining against the grade, while doubt crept in with the altitude. What if the coordinates led nowhere? What if her grandfather had been delusional, broken by guilt and fear into creating elaborate fantasies? She could be driving toward empty wilderness, chasing the ravings of a man who'd abandoned his family to escape his own conscience. But she couldn't turn back, not yet. The main road gave way to a Forest Service route, then to a dirt track that her Honda barely tolerated. Tree branches scraped the roof like skeletal fingers. Maya's knuckles went white on the steering wheel as the path wound deeper into wilderness that felt actively hostile, as if the mountains themselves were trying to turn her away. Then she saw it. A wooden structure crouched between towering trees like a secret waiting to be discovered. The cabin was smaller than she'd imagined, its logs weathered grey by decades of mountain storms. The roof sagged under accumulated moss, and the windows stared blindly from frames that had lost their glass years ago. But it was unmistakably the place her grandfather had marked on his map, positioned exactly where the coordinates indicated, hidden in a grove that would be invisible from any direction except the narrow approach she'd taken. Maya parked and sat in the sudden silence, her engine ticking as it cooled. This was the moment of choice her grandfather had orchestrated across 7 decades. Everything he'd planned, everything he'd sacrificed, led to this threshold between her old life and whatever waited inside those rotting walls. Her phone had no signal. No one knew where she was. If something happened here, Emma would grow up the same way Maya had, wondering what became of the parent who simply vanished into mystery. The thought of Emma sitting in Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen, maybe right now asking when Mommy would come home, nearly broke Maya's resolve. This was exactly how dangerous legacies perpetuated themselves, each generation making the same reckless choices, abandoning safety for the illusion of answers. But Emma's face in her mind wasn't just worried now. It was disappointed, ashamed of a mother who'd had the chance to fight for their future, but had chosen fear instead. Maya opened the car door. The mountain air bit through her jacket immediately, carrying scents of pine sap and decay. Her footsteps crunched on frost-brittle leaves as she approached the cabin's sagging porch. The front door hung askew on rusted hinges, revealing darkness that seemed to breathe with its own presence. Maya stepped across the threshold and felt 70 years of history settle around her like a shroud. The interior was larger than expected. One main room with a stone fireplace blackened by countless fires. Rotting furniture suggested people had lived here once, had made this place a temporary home during desperate journeys. But what drew Maya's attention was the far wall, where someone had carved symbols into the wood, dates, initials, marks that might have been a record or a warning. Her flashlight beam found fresh scratches in the dust. Someone else had been here recently. Maya's blood turned to ice water as the implications sank in. She wasn't alone in seeking her grandfather's secrets. The people he'd warned about, the ones who would not stop looking, had found this place first. Behind her, a twig snapped in the forest. Maya spun toward the sound, her flashlight cutting through shadows that suddenly felt alive with threat. Her grandfather's warning echoed in her mind. They will not stop looking. The ordeal he'd prepared her for was about to begin. Maya's flashlight beam trembled as she swept it across the forest, finding nothing but trees that swayed in wind that hadn't been there moments before. The silence stretched like a held breath, broken only by her hammering pulse and the distant creak of the cabin settling around her. Maybe she'd imagined the sound. Maybe 70 years of her grandfather's paranoia were finally claiming their intended victim, turning every natural forest noise into mortal threat. But the fresh disturbances in the dust were real enough. Footprints too large to be hers, drag marks where something heavy had been moved recently. Maya forced herself to breathe, to think beyond the terror clawing at her chest. She'd come this far. Whatever her grandfather had hidden here might be her only chance at financial stability, at giving Emma a future that didn't involve eviction notices and shoes with holes. She wouldn't run at the first sign of Maya Chen. Her name, spoken from the darkness beyond her car, hit her like a physical blow. The voice was calm, almost conversational, with an accent she couldn't place. Definitely male, probably middle-aged, and far too confident for someone calling to a stranger in the middle of nowhere. We need to talk. Maya's hand found the kitchen knife in her jacket pocket, her fingers closing around the familiar grip. Fat lot of good it would do against someone who'd tracked her to a place she'd barely found herself. I don't know who you are, but I know exactly who you are. Footsteps crunched closer, unhurried and deliberate. David Chen's granddaughter, the one who opened his safety deposit box 3 days ago and walked out with his journal. The casual mention of details he couldn't possibly know sent fresh terror spiraling through Maya's chest. These people, whoever they were, had been watching her since the bank, maybe since the storage unit. Every move she'd thought was secret had been observed, catalogued, anticipated. What do you want? Her voice cracked, despite her efforts to sound brave. The same thing your grandfather stole from us in 1945, the same thing that family has owed for 70 years. The footsteps stopped just outside her flashlight's range. You're going to help us find it? I don't know what you're talking about, but even as Maya spoke the denial, pieces clicked together in her mind. Her grandfather's journal entries about money that had gone missing, about trust betrayed and people who'd died. He hadn't just smuggled refugees, he'd stolen something in the process. A second voice emerged from a different direction, flanking her without her realizing it. Check the cabin. She might have already found it. Maya spun toward the new speaker, her flashlight revealing nothing but forest shadows that could hide an army. They'd surrounded her while she stood frozen in terror, professional and patient as hunters who'd cornered their prey. Please. The word escaped before Maya could stop it. I have a daughter. She's only 8 years old. We know about Emma. The first voice carried a note of sympathy that somehow made everything worse. She's having a sleepover with Mrs. Rodriguez tonight, playing Nintendo and eating homemade tamales. Sweet kid. Maya's knees nearly buckled. They'd been watching Emma too, had catalogued her daughter's routines and safe spaces. The threat hung unspoken but absolute. Cooperate or 8-year-old Emma would pay the price for her grandfather's crimes. The money in the safety deposit box was just interest. The voice continued conversationally. Your grandfather stole something worth 50 times that amount. We want it back. He's been dead for decades. How am I supposed to know where? Because he left you a map, because you're standing in the place it led you to, because David Chen was too sentimental to destroy what he stole, even knowing it would put his family in danger. Footsteps began moving again, closing the circle. Start looking, Maya. Check the fireplace, the floorboards, anywhere someone might hide a small metal case. Maya's flashlight shook as the full scope of her stupidity crashed down on her. She'd walked into their trap like a lamb to slaughter, led by her own desperation and her grandfather's guilty breadcrumbs. Every choice that had seemed courageous now revealed itself as catastrophically naive. Her phone had no signal. No one knew where she was. Emma would wake up tomorrow to Mrs. Rodriguez's gentle explanation that Mommy hadn't come home, that sometimes adults disappeared, just like Maya's own father had vanished before her birth. The pattern would repeat. Another generation of abandonment, another child growing up with questions that had no safe answers. "I can't find something that doesn't exist," Maya whispered, but she was already moving toward the fireplace with the mechanical obedience of absolute defeat. Behind her, the cabin door creaked shut. The sound echoed like a coffin lid closing, sealing her inside her grandfather's legacy of blood and betrayal. She was trapped, and Emma was alone, and 70 years of running had finally led the Chen family to a reckoning none of them would survive. Maya knelt before the stone fireplace, her hands shaking as she ran them along the mortar joints. The flashlight beam wavered across decades of soot and ash, revealing nothing but the ordinary decay of abandonment. Behind her, she could hear the soft scrape of boots on wooden floors as her captors spread through the cabin with professional efficiency. "The case would be about the size of a cigar box," the first voice said helpfully. "Metal, probably wrapped in oilcloth." David was paranoid about moisture damage. Maya's fingers found a loose stone near the hearth's base. Hope flared briefly, but the space behind it contained only spiderwebs and the desiccated corpse of some small animal. She moved to the next stone, then the next, while her mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios. "This is pointless," she said. "Even if he did hide something here, it could have been moved years ago. Animals could have—" "Your grandfather visited this place every year until 1967. The voice cut through her protests with clinical precision. "Bank records show regular purchases of camping equipment, enough gasoline for mountain trips. He maintained whatever he hid here until the day he died." Maya froze. "Bank records from the 1960s? We've been very thorough, Maya. 70 years is a long time to investigate a theft." The casual revelation hit her like ice water. These weren't random criminals or opportunistic treasure hunters. They were part of something vast and patient, an organization that had spent 7 decades tracking down her grandfather's crime. The money she'd found wasn't blood money from wartime chaos. It was payment from people who never forgot debts, never stopped hunting, never forgave. What exactly did he steal? Maya's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Bearer bonds, Swiss bank certificates, gold coins that certain prominent families had converted to portable assets before fleeing occupied territories." The speaker moved closer, his shadow falling across Maya's hunched form. "Your grandfather was supposed to help them retrieve those assets after the war ended. Instead, he kept them for himself and disappeared." The words landed like physical blows. Maya's entire understanding of her family's history crumbled in an instant. Her grandfather hadn't been a hero saving refugees. He'd been a thief who'd robbed desperate families of their survival money. The people tracking him weren't Nazi sympathizers or war criminals. They were the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors seeking justice for a betrayal that had destroyed their families' futures. "He left them with nothing," Maya breathed. "Worse than nothing. He left them believing their money was safely hidden while they struggled to rebuild their lives from zero. Some families never recovered. Some didn't survive the poverty that followed. The voice carried decades of accumulated grief. Your comfort has been built on their suffering." Maya's hands fell away from the fireplace as the full weight of her inheritance crashed down. Every dollar her grandfather had left, every advantage it had provided her family, had been stolen from people who'd already lost everything. Her daughter's future depended on blood money taken from other children who'd grown up hungry while Maya's mother lived in relative security. But even as shame overwhelmed her, a deeper realization crystallized. You already know where it is, don't you? Silence. You've been here before. You searched this place years ago. Maya stood slowly, understanding flooding through her with terrible clarity. This isn't about finding hidden treasure, this is about something else entirely. The silence stretched longer this time, and Maya knew she'd guessed correctly. Her flashlight beam swept the cabin's corners, finding evidence she'd missed before: professional tool marks on the walls, sections of floorboard that had been carefully removed and replaced, areas where the dust patterns showed recent systematic searching. Then what do you want from me? Your grandfather was smarter than we initially gave him credit for. The admission came reluctantly. He didn't just hide the assets, he destroyed them. Maya's world tilted again. What? The bearer bonds burned, the certificates dissolved in acid, the gold melted down and sold piecemeal over decades. Each word carried the weight of frustrated fury. He made sure that even if we found his hiding places, we'd recover nothing. So this is about revenge. Maya's voice hardened as the truth finally emerged. You can't get your money back, so you want to make his family pay instead. We want closure. Your grandfather died believing he'd protected his descendants by destroying the evidence of his crimes. We want him to be wrong. The threat crystallized with brutal clarity. They couldn't recover their stolen inheritance, so they'd settle for destroying the thief's family tree. Maya's death would complete a circle of justice that had remained open for 70 years. But as that understanding settled over her, something unexpected happened. The paralyzing fear that had controlled her since arriving at the cabin began transforming into something harder, more dangerous. Maya Chen had spent her entire life running from her grandfather's legacy, but standing in the ruins of his final secret, surrounded by the consequences of his choices, she realized she was tired of running. Her daughter deserved better than a mother who died on her knees, begging for mercy that would never come. Maya straightened slowly, her spine lengthening vertebra by vertebra until she stood at her full height. The fear that had paralyzed her moments before still coursed through her veins, but it was changing, crystallizing into something her grandfather's enemies hadn't expected, defiance born of maternal fury. You know what the real difference is between you and my grandfather? Maya's voice carried a steadiness that surprised even her. He destroyed evidence to protect his family. You're planning to murder a single mother to satisfy a 70-year-old grudge. The silence that followed felt different now. Less predatory confidence, more careful recalculation. Maya had shifted the dynamic, and they both knew it. Emma doesn't deserve to pay for crimes committed before she was born, Maya continued, taking a deliberate step toward the voice in the darkness. But then again, neither did the families my grandfather stole from. We're all victims of the same dead man's choices. Pretty words won't change what happens next. No, but they might change what you become in the process. Maya's hand moved away from the knife in her pocket. Not in surrender, but in a calculated gamble. You've spent 70 years hunting justice. Is this really how you want it to end? Becoming the monsters your families suffered under? A new voice spoke from the shadows near the door, younger and less certain than the first. She has a point, Uncle. This isn't what Grandfather would have wanted. Grandfather died in poverty because of her family, but the first voice had lost some of its clinical certainty. Justice delayed isn't justice denied. Maya seized the opening. Justice served through child abandonment isn't justice. It's perpetuating the cycle. You kill me. Emma grows up the same way I did. Angry, desperate, making terrible choices. Maybe she comes looking for revenge against your families 20 years from now. When does it stop? The cabin fell silent except for the wind in the trees outside. Maya could hear her captors breathing, could sense the weight of internal debate in the pause that stretched between them. 70 years of grievance was a heavy burden to carry, but so was the prospect of becoming what they'd originally fought against. "There's another way," Maya said quietly. "My grandfather may have destroyed the original assets, but I found money he'd hidden. Enough to start making payments. $47,000. The voice held bitter amusement, against debts that would be worth millions in today's currency. "It's a start. And there might be more." Maya was improvising now, building possibilities from desperate hope. Bank records from the 1960s. "You said he kept visiting here, kept maintaining something. Maybe he didn't destroy everything. Maybe he just hid it better." The younger voice spoke again. "Even if that were true, why should we trust you to look? Your family's already proven their word means nothing." Maya felt the conversation teetering on a knife's edge. One wrong word would send her tumbling back into helpless victim status, but the right approach might transform her captors into reluctant allies. The key was acknowledging their pain while asserting her own agency. "Because I'm not my grandfather," she said simply. "Because I've seen what his choices cost. Not just your family's, but mine too. My mother spent her whole life looking over her shoulder, afraid of shadows she couldn't even name. I grew up believing we had no family, no history, no place in the world. His theft didn't just rob your relatives, it poisoned mine." She paused, letting the parallel sink in before continuing. "But mostly because Emma is 8 years old, and she deserves better than to inherit this war." The silence stretched longer this time. Maya could hear murmured conversation in what sounded like another language, urgent whispers that suggested real disagreement among her captors. The younger voice was arguing passionately while the older one responded with sharp-clipped phrases that sounded like counter-arguments. Finally, the first voice addressed her again. "If we were to consider such an arrangement, what exactly are you proposing?" Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they were actually negotiating. "Partnership. You have resources, connections, 70 years of investigation. I have legal claim to anything my grandfather left behind. We work together to find whatever can still be recovered, and I sign over a fair share to your families. And if we find nothing more, then I make payments from what I do have, monthly installments until the debt is covered, even if it takes the rest of my life." The words tasted like ash, but Maya forced them out. "My daughter grows up knowing the truth about our family, but also knowing we chose to make things right instead of running away again." The younger voice had gone silent, but Maya could sense shifting dynamics in the darkness around her. Her grandfather's enemies were becoming something else, reluctant partners in a justice that might actually serve the living instead of just satisfying the dead. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even trust, but it was possibility, and that was more hope than Maya had possessed when she'd first walked into this trap. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, she wasn't running from her grandfather's legacy. She was choosing how to carry it forward. The weight of possibility hung in the mountain air like morning mist, fragile and transformative. Maya could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the silence that followed her proposal, each pulse marking time between her old life as David Chen's unknowing heir and whatever came next. "There are conditions," the older voice finally said, and Maya nearly sagged with relief at the admission of negotiation. "You don't work alone. One of us accompanies you on any search. You don't make financial decisions without our approval. And if you try to run—" "I won't." Maya's interruption surprised them both. "I can't keep living like this, always looking over my shoulder, never knowing when the past will catch up. Emma deserves a mother who faces problems instead of fleeing from them." The younger voice stepped closer, and Maya caught her first glimpse of her captors, a man in his 30s with kind eyes that reminded her painfully of Emma's, wearing hiking gear that spoke of practical preparation rather than criminal intent. Behind him, an older man emerged from the shadows near the door, his face carved by decades of patient grief, but not hardened into cruelty. "My name is Aaron Goldstein," the younger man said quietly. "This is my uncle, Samuel. Our grandfather was Herman Goldstein. Your grandfather promised to safeguard his family's assets until they could be safely retrieved after the war. Maya nodded, understanding that she was being offered names as a gesture of provisional trust. Herman survived the camps? Barely. He made it to Portland in 1947 with our grandmother and their 2 young children, one of them my father. Aaron's voice carried the careful precision of a story told many times. They had nothing except Herman's memory of the man who'd promised to keep their fortune safe until they could reclaim it. My grandfather told him the assets had been seized by authorities. Samuel's voice held 7 decades of accumulated bitterness. Herman spent the rest of his life believing he'd somehow failed to protect his family's future. He died thinking he was a fool for trusting a stranger. The weight of inherited shame pressed down on Maya's shoulders like a physical burden. She thought of her own mother's fearful silences, the way she'd flinched at unexpected knocks on the door, the paranoia that had shaped Maya's childhood. Both families had been poisoned by David Chen's choices, trapped in different versions of the same ongoing nightmare. How many families? Maya asked. 12 that we've been able to trace, Aaron said. Herman wasn't the only one your grandfather betrayed. The others scattered across the country, most never learning the truth about what happened to their assets. They rebuilt their lives from nothing, while your family lived off their stolen security. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the full scope of her inheritance crystallizing into a debt that monthly payments could never truly satisfy. But Emma's future hung in the balance, and sometimes making amends meant accepting lifelong obligation rather than seeking easy absolution. The cabin. You've really searched everywhere? Samuel nodded grimly. Every wall, every floorboard, every stone in that fireplace. We found evidence he'd been here regularly, but whatever he maintained wasn't hidden in the structure itself. Then what? Maya opened her eyes, studying the cabin with new perspective. What required regular maintenance but wasn't part of the building? The 3 of them stood in contemplative silence, each approaching the puzzle from different angles shaped by their respective obsessions. Maya thought about her grandfather's meticulous nature, the way he'd layered secrets within secrets throughout his life. Aaron and Samuel carried the weight of professional investigation, 70 years of systematic searching that had eliminated countless possibilities. The well, Aaron said suddenly. There's an old hand pump well behind the cabin. We checked it, but if he was visiting regularly... Water levels change with seasons, Maya finished, understanding flooding through her. Something that's safely hidden during dry months might be underwater during spring snowmelt. He'd need to check it annually, maintain whatever waterproofing he'd used. Samuel was already moving toward the cabin door, his urgency infectious. We'll need rope, tools to work the pump mechanism. If he suspended something in the well shaft... But Maya remained motionless, a different realization stopping her cold. What if we find nothing? What if this is another dead end? Aaron turned back toward her, and in his expression Maya saw the echo of her own desperate hope. Then we keep looking, but together this time, instead of hunter and prey. The promise carried weight that transcended their temporary alliance. Maya was committing to something larger than her own survival. She was choosing to inherit her grandfather's debts along with his secrets, to become accountable for justice delayed but not denied. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching weather. Dawn was still hours away, but Maya felt like she was stepping into light for the first time since opening that storage unit. The road back to redemption stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer traveled alone. Maya followed Aaron and Samuel into the pre-dawn darkness, her breath forming white clouds in the mountain air. The old well stood 30 yards behind the cabin, its stone rim weathered smooth by decades of rain and snow. The hand pump mechanism rose from the center like a skeletal arm, its iron handle crusted with rust that flaked away at Aaron's touch. We'll need light, Samuel said, producing a powerful LED lantern that threw harsh shadows across the well's mouth. And something to test the depth. Maya picked up a stone and dropped it into the darkness below. The sound of impact came quickly, a metallic clang rather than a splash, waters low, maybe 3 feet down. Aaron was already rigging a rope system around the pump handle, his movements efficient despite the obvious tension. If your grandfather suspended something in the shaft, it would be hung at a level that stays dry during normal conditions, but gets checked whenever water rises. Maya leaned over the stone rim, peering down into the circle of LED illumination. The well shaft was deeper than she'd expected, disappearing beyond the lantern's reach. But about 8 feet down, something glinted, a brief reflection that vanished when she shifted position. There, she pointed into the depths. Something metallic just below the permanent waterline. Samuel tested the rope with his full weight before handing the end to Maya. "You're the lightest, and legally, anything down there belongs to you until we can determine what portion represents stolen assets." Maya wrapped the rope around her waist, surprised by how naturally she fell into partnership with her former captors. 24 hours ago, she'd been a desperate single mother gambling her last $50 on worthless paintings. Now she was rappelling into a mountain well in search of Holocaust survivors' stolen inheritance. The descent was easier than expected. The well shaft was wide enough for her shoulders to clear the walls, and the stone construction provided convenient footholds. As she lowered herself toward the glinting object, Maya realized her grandfather had chosen his hiding place with characteristic cleverness, accessible enough for annual maintenance, but invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for a cache suspended in mid-shaft. "What do you see?" Aaron's voice echoed from above. Maya steadied herself against the well wall and reached toward the metallic glint. Her fingers closed around a waterproof container the size of a large coffee can, suspended from a system of pulleys and counterweights that would raise or lower the cache depending on water levels. The engineering was elegant in its simplicity, automatic protection that required no human intervention except periodic maintenance of the mechanism itself. "Got it," she called upward. "There's definitely something here." The ascent proved more challenging with the container clutched against her chest, but Maya emerged from the well shaft with her prize intact. Samuel immediately trained his lantern on the waterproof seal while Aaron examined the pulley system still suspended below. "Military surplus," Samuel observed, running his fingers along the container's edges, probably acquired in the late 1940s when war materiel was being sold off cheap. Maya's hands shook as she worked the sealed latches. Everything she'd learned about her grandfather suggested this container would hold answers rather than treasures, explanations rather than assets. The waterproof lid opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a leather portfolio that had survived 7 decades in near-perfect condition. Maya lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of documents within. But beneath the portfolio, something else caught the lantern light. Small canvas bags that clinked with metallic sound. "Gold coins," Aaron breathed, reaching for one of the bags. "These look like the Krugerrands Herman described." Maya opened the portfolio with trembling fingers. The first document was a detailed inventory written in her grandfather's careful handwriting. Names, amounts, specific descriptions of assets entrusted to his care. 12 families listed, each entry followed by notations tracking what had been liquidated, what had been preserved, and what had been converted to more stable forms. "He didn't steal it," Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her as she read further. "He protected it." Samuel leaned closer, his skepticism evident. "What do you mean?" Maya held up a letter dated 1952, written in her grandfather's hand but addressed to Herman Goldstein. He liquidated everything in 1951 when the FBI started investigating wartime refugee networks. Banking regulations were changing, and he was afraid the assets would be seized if they were discovered. Aaron took the letter, reading rapidly. He converted everything to gold and planned to return it once the investigation died down. But Herman had already given up hope and stopped trying to contact him. "Look at the dates," Maya said, pulling out more documents. "He came here every year for decades, updating records, adding interest calculations. He was preparing to make restitution, but he never found a way to locate the families safely. The three of them stared at the evidence of a truth none had expected. David Chen hadn't been a thief who'd betrayed Holocaust survivors' trust. He'd been a protector whose caution had become permanent separation, whose good intentions had created suffering through inaction rather than malice. But Maya realized this revelation brought its own terrible burden. Her grandfather hadn't passed down stolen wealth. He'd left her the responsibility for returning a fortune to families who'd waited 70 years for justice that was always meant to come. The leather portfolio slipped from Maya's hands as footsteps crashed through the underbrush surrounding the well. Aaron's lantern beam swung wildly as dark figures emerged from the tree line. 3 men in tactical gear, moving with military precision. "Step away from the container," commanded a voice Maya recognized with sickening clarity. Markus Volkov emerged into the light, his expensive suit replaced by black combat clothing that made him look less like a businessman and more like the predator he'd always been. Samuel reached for something inside his jacket, but the metallic click of a safety being released stopped him cold. One of Volkov's men held a pistol trained on Maya, while another covered Aaron with practiced efficiency. 70 years, Volkov said conversationally, his accent thicker now that the pretense of civility had dropped. 70 years my family has waited for justice. Did you really think you could steal it again? Maya's mind raced as she understood the full scope of her miscalculation. You're not a buyer. You're one of the families. The Volkov family entrusted everything to David Chen in 1943. Gold, jewelry, bank documents, 3 generations of accumulated wealth that was supposed to keep us safe in America. His voice carried the weight of inherited rage. Instead, your grandfather disappeared our future and left us to starve in displaced person camps. Aaron stepped protectively closer to Maya, his movement deliberately non-threatening but unmistakably defensive. Herman Goldstein was my grandfather. We've been searching too. Volkov's laugh held no warmth. I know exactly who you are, Aaron. Your grandfather was weak. He accepted Chen's lies and gave up searching. My family never stopped hunting. His gaze fixed on Maya with predatory intensity. We've been watching you since Seattle, waiting to see what you would uncover. The container of gold coins sat between them like a physical manifestation of 7 decades of anguish. Maya realized that finding her grandfather's cash had solved nothing. It had only escalated the confrontation to its inevitable climax. The records show he was protecting everyone's assets, Maya said, fighting to keep her voice steady. He converted everything to gold when the FBI investigation threatened. He stole it. Volkov's composure cracked, revealing the fury beneath. My grandmother sold her wedding ring for passage to America because David Chen claimed our deposits were seized. She died believing we were paupers. Samuel's voice cut through the tension with unexpected authority. I've seen those FBI files, Volkov. Your family wasn't listed among Chen's depositors. Maya watched Volkov's expression shift almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of surprise that suggested Samuel had struck closer to truth than expected. But instead of deflating his rage, the observation seemed to intensify it. Records can be altered. Names can be removed. Volkov gestured toward the container with violent emphasis. But gold doesn't lie. That fortune was built from blood money, assets stolen from families who trusted a stranger with their survival. The accusation hung in the mountain air like smoke, and Maya felt understanding crystallize with devastating clarity. This wasn't about returning stolen inheritance to Holocaust survivors. Volkov represented something far more dangerous, the collision between legitimate grievance and manufactured justification, between inherited trauma and chosen vengeance. How much of that is actually yours? She asked quietly. The question detonated like a grenade in the tense silence. Volkov's men shifted position, their weapons tracking between Maya and the Goldstein men with increasing nervousness. Whatever they'd expected from this confrontation, philosophical debate about moral legitimacy, wasn't part of the plan. All of it, Volkov snarled. but his tone carried the desperation of someone whose certainty was being challenged. Chen stole from refugees. Every coin in that container represents Jewish suffering he profited from. Maya looked at the portfolio of meticulous records, at Aaron's face carved by generational grief, at Samuel's protective stance over evidence that might finally bring peace to his family's nightmare. Her grandfather's true legacy wasn't the gold or the hidden assets. It was the choice between perpetuating cycles of inherited pain or breaking them through imperfect justice. "Then take what's yours," Maya said, her voice carrying surprising steadiness. "Show us the documentation. Prove your family's claim, and we'll honor it immediately." The challenge shifted the confrontation's entire dynamic. Volkov's men exchanged glances that suggested they hadn't expected their employer's moral authority to be questioned. Aaron stepped closer to Maya's shoulder, his posture indicating alliance rather than submission. "You can't prove it, can you?" Samuel's voice held the weight of a prosecutor making closing arguments. "Because Marcus Volkov isn't seeking justice for Holocaust survivors, he's seeking revenge for something else entirely." Volkov's composure finally shattered completely. The businessman's mask fell away, revealing something far more dangerous underneath: desperation disguised as righteousness, greed wearing the costume of inherited obligation. "Enough talking," he snapped, nodding toward his armed men. "We're taking everything." Maya realized her grandfather's most important lesson hadn't been hidden in secret compartments or buried caches. Sometimes the only way to escape the past's gravitational pull was to face it directly, consequences and all. She stepped between Volkov and the container, choosing confrontation over surrender. The first gunshot shattered the mountain silence. Maya threw herself sideways as the bullet whined past her ear, her body hitting the ground hard enough to drive breath from her lungs. Aaron tackled Samuel behind the well's stone rim, while Volkov's men spread into tactical positions around the clearing. "Bring me the container," Volkov shouted over the chaos. "Kill anyone who interferes." Maya's mind crystallized with desperate clarity. The waterproof cache lay exposed beside the well, 70 years of carefully preserved justice reduced to a prize in an armed robbery. But as she watched Volkov's men advance, she realized the terrible mathematics of survival. Protecting her grandfather's legacy meant sacrificing everything she'd fought to preserve. Her phone. Emma's location was still active on the family tracking app. "Aaron!" Maya screamed, pulling the device from her pocket. "If I don't make it back, Emma's with my neighbor Sarah Martinez, 1247 Oak Street in Portland. Promise me." Aaron's eyes widened with understanding as another gunshot rang out. "Maya, what are you—" She was already moving. Instead of retreating from Volkov's men, Maya lunged toward the container of gold coins. Her fingers closed around the handle as bullets sparked off the well's stone rim. The weight of 3 generations stolen security pulled at her shoulder as she sprinted toward the tree line. "She's got it," one of Volkov's men yelled. "Target the woman." The forest exploded around Maya as she crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at her clothes while gunfire erupted behind her. She could hear pursuit, boots pounding against fallen leaves, voices coordinating her capture. But Maya had grown up in Portland's urban wilderness. She understood how terrain could be an ally if desperation made you clever enough. The slope ahead dropped into a rocky ravine she'd noticed during their approach to the cabin, steep enough to be treacherous, deep enough to provide cover. Maya didn't slow as she reached the edge. She leaped into open space, the container clutched against her chest like a shield. The impact drove her to her knees among loose stones, but she forced herself upright and kept moving. Behind her, Volkov's shouts grew more distant as his men struggled to follow her route down the unstable slope. Maya's lungs burned as she climbed toward a ridge she'd glimpsed through the trees. But with each step, the true cost of her escape became clearer. Even if she evaded capture, even if she somehow made it back to Portland, what then? Volkov knew where she lived, knew about Emma. Running with the container meant protecting evidence of her grandfather's innocence while making her daughter a permanent target. The ridge offered a momentary vantage point over the valley below. Dawn was breaking through the mountain peaks, painting the forest in shades of gold that reminded Maya painfully of Emma's hair. Her daughter would be waking up soon, probably wondering why Mommy hadn't come home from her business trip. Footsteps crashed through the brush below. Volkov's men had found her trail. Maya opened the waterproof container one final time, pulling out her grandfather's inventory records. The names of 12 families, each entry representing lives disrupted by war and betrayal. Aaron's grandfather Herman was listed third, his assets meticulously catalogued and preserved. But at the bottom of the page, in David Chen's careful handwriting, she found an entry that made her breath catch. For my granddaughter, if she exists, I pray she will be braver than I was. The choice between justice and safety should never fall to one person alone. Understanding flooded through Maya with devastating finality. Her grandfather hadn't just preserved Holocaust survivors' assets, he'd preserved the moral burden of returning them. The container wasn't her inheritance, it was her responsibility. And responsibility sometimes demanded sacrifices that safety would never permit. Maya pulled out her phone and activated the video camera. Speaking quickly but clearly, she recorded everything: the inventory, the gold coins, the location coordinates, Aaron's contact information. Her testament to truth in case courage wasn't enough to guarantee survival. Then she buried the phone beneath a distinctive rock formation and picked up the container. Volkov's men emerged from the tree line below as Maya stepped into view on the ridge. She held the container high above her head where they could see it clearly. "Marcus Volkov," she shouted down the slope. "You want your family's justice, come and take it." Her voice echoed across the valley, carrying challenge and resignation in equal measure. Maya understood now why her mother had lived in fearful silence, why some debts could never be fully paid, but she also understood that breaking cycles of inherited pain sometimes required someone willing to absorb the final blow. The container felt surprisingly light in her hands as Volkov's men began climbing toward her position. Maya thought of Emma's laugh, of art classes they'd never share, of bedtime stories that would remain unfinished. But her daughter would grow up free from the weight of stolen gold and 70-year-old vengeance. That freedom was worth any price Maya might be forced to pay. She waited on the ridge as armed men closed the distance, her grandfather's legacy clutched against her heart. The gunshot that rang out across the ridge came not from Volkov's men, but from somewhere beyond the tree line. Maya flinched, expecting impact, but the sound echoed from below where she'd left Aaron and Samuel at the well. "FBI, drop your weapons." The voice carried with unmistakable authority as federal agents emerged from concealment positions throughout the forest. Maya watched in stunned disbelief as Volkov's men found themselves surrounded by tactical teams that seemed to materialize from the mountain itself. Maya Chen, Agent Rebecca Torres, stepped into view, her weapon trained on the nearest gunman. "Step away from the edge and move toward my voice." Maya's legs nearly buckled with relief as she stumbled down from the ridge, the container still clutched against her chest. The surreal tableau below showed Volkov face down in the dirt beside the well, his hands zip-tied behind his back, while Aaron and Samuel emerged from cover with expressions of shell-shocked bewilderment. "How did you—" Maya began as Torres reached her position. "Samuel Goldstein contacted us yesterday," Torres explained, her eyes never leaving the subdued gunman. "When he realized you were walking into something bigger than a simple family dispute, he provided enough information for us to track Volkov's operation." Maya turned towards Samuel, who was helping Aaron to his feet near the well. The older man's face carried exhaustion mixed with vindication, the expression of someone whose suspicions had finally been validated. "Marcus Volkov has been running refugee asset recovery as a criminal enterprise for 15 years, Torres continued, as her team secured the scene. "He targets families searching for Holocaust-era inheritances, manufactures false documentation, and uses violence to steal whatever they uncover." The revelation hit Maya like physical impact. His family wasn't on my grandfather's list. His family wasn't even in Europe during the war. Volkov emigrated from Russia in the 1990s and built his entire identity around fabricated Holocaust survivor credentials. Torres gestured toward the container Maya still held. We'd been tracking him through 3 states, but we needed him to reveal his operation in action. Maya sank onto a fallen log, the adrenaline finally leaving her system in a rush that made her hands shake uncontrollably. The past 72 hours collapsed into a surreal montage: storage unit paintings, hidden maps, deadly confrontations with a man whose grievance was entirely fictional. The assets, she whispered, looking down at the waterproof container. The real families. We'll finally receive justice, Aaron said, approaching with the leather portfolio that contained his grandfather's documentation. Samuel's been working with the FBI's art crime team for months, trying to trace Holocaust-era assets through criminal networks. Torres nodded toward the portfolio. Your grandfather's records are the most complete documentation we've seen. 12 families, each case cross-referenced with State Department refugee files and banking records from the 1940s. David Chen wasn't protecting stolen assets, he was preserving evidence. Maya felt tears she hadn't realized were falling streaked down her face. The weight of inherited guilt she'd carried since discovering the hidden compartment began to lift, replaced by understanding of her grandfather's true burden. He hadn't been a thief paralyzed by guilt. He'd been a guardian waiting for the right moment to ensure justice reached its intended recipients. My mother, Maya said quietly. She knew? The FBI investigation in 1951 scared them both, Samuel explained, settling beside her on the log. Your grandfather couldn't risk exposure that might have resulted in asset seizure. Your mother couldn't risk association with wartime refugee networks that were still being scrutinized for communist connections. The irony cut deep. Her mother's fearful silence had been motivated by the same protective instincts that now made Maya desperate to return home to Emma. Cycles of inherited trauma disguised as necessary caution, passed down through generations that never understood the original source of their anxiety. What happens now? Maya asked, watching federal agents inventory the gold coins with methodical precision. Torres consulted her tablet, scrolling through information Maya couldn't see. The assets will be processed through the International Commission on Holocaust-era insurance claims. Each family on your grandfather's list will be contacted through proper channels. The distribution process will take months, but the waiting is finally over. Maya thought of Herman Goldstein dying in Seattle, believing he'd been betrayed by a man who'd actually spent decades trying to protect what remained of his family's security. Some forms of justice arrived too late for the people who needed them most, but that didn't diminish their importance for the generations that followed. Aaron crouched beside the log where Maya sat, his expression carrying a mixture of grief and gratitude that she recognized from her own emotional landscape. Your grandfather saved my family's future, even though my grandfather never knew it. Emma's inheritance isn't stolen gold, it's the knowledge that her great-grandfather was a righteous man. As federal agents prepared to escort Volkov down the mountain, Maya understood that her real inheritance had never been hidden assets or family secrets. It was the choice her grandfather had faced in 1943, the decision to protect people who needed protection regardless of personal cost. The container felt lighter in her hands as she prepared to surrender it to proper authorities. Her daughter would grow up knowing that sometimes courage meant waiting decades for justice to become possible. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in her small Portland apartment, watching Emma arrange oil paintings against the living room wall. The storage unit canvases, the ones without hidden compartments, had found new purpose as Emma's personal art gallery, their amateur brushstroke somehow more beautiful now that Maya understood their role in leading her to truth. This one looks like the mountains where you went on your business trip, Emma said, tilting her head at a landscape that bore no resemblance to the Cascades, but captured something essential about hope emerging from darkness. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Aaron Goldstein's first distribution meeting scheduled for December. My family's portion will fund a scholarship for refugee children. Thought you'd want to know. She smiled, remembering the federal agent's methodical inventory process, the careful documentation that would finally connect survivors' families with assets preserved across 7 decades. Agent Torres had estimated the total value at nearly $2 million, money that would change 12 families' lives in ways David Chen had dreamed but never lived to witness. "Mom, you've been different since your trip," Emma observed, stepping back to evaluate her makeshift gallery. "Happier but also sadder, like when you finish reading a really good book." The accuracy of 8-year-old perception never ceased to amaze Maya. She was different, changed by the weight of inherited responsibility she'd carried and finally learned to release. The fear that had shadowed her mother's life, the constant vigilance against dangers that could never be fully explained, had lifted like fog burning off under morning sun. "I learned some things about our family," Maya said carefully. "About your great-grandfather I never knew before. Was he a good person?" Maya looked at the paintings surrounding them, worthless art that had preserved priceless justice, amateur work that had somehow guided her toward professional closure. Her grandfather's legacy wasn't the gold or the hidden assets. It was the choice to protect rather than profit, to preserve rather than possess. He was a person who did good things when it was very difficult and dangerous, Maya said. Sometimes that's the best any of us can be. Emma nodded with the solemnity children brought to important revelations, like how you took that scary business trip even though you were afraid, because it was the right thing to do. Maya's breath caught. She'd never explicitly told Emma about the danger, but her daughter had intuited the emotional undertones of those 3 days when Maya's world had fundamentally shifted. Children absorbed family anxiety like sponges, just as Maya had absorbed her mother's fearful vigilance without understanding its source. "Yes," Maya said. "Exactly like that." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Maya opened it to find Sarah Martinez, her neighbor who'd watched Emma during the mountain confrontation, holding a casserole dish and wearing an expression of curiosity barely contained by politeness. "I brought dinner," Sarah announced, though her eyes moved past Maya toward the paintings. "Emma mentioned you found some family history in those storage unit purchases. How exciting!" Maya accepted the dish gratefully, understanding that Sarah's kindness came with legitimate curiosity about her neighbor's mysterious 3-day absence. The truth was too complex for casual conversation, but Maya found herself wanting to share some version of it, to break the cycle of fearful silence that had isolated her mother for 50 years. "I discovered my grandfather helped people during World War II, Maya said simply. "It took a long time to understand what that meant for our family." Sarah's expression shifted from curiosity to respect. "That must have been overwhelming. Finding out you're connected to something that important." "It was," Maya admitted, "but also healing in ways I didn't expect." After Sarah left, Maya and Emma ate dinner surrounded by amateur paintings and the comfortable quiet of a home where secrets no longer festered in shadows. Maya's phone showed 17 missed calls from reporters who'd somehow connected her to the Volkov arrest, but she'd decided not to engage with media interest in her story. Some forms of justice worked better without publicity. Instead, she'd accepted Torres's offer to speak with other families searching for Holocaust-era assets, to share David Chen's methodology for preserving evidence across decades of uncertainty. Maya's inheritance wasn't gold, it was the knowledge that ordinary people could choose extraordinary courage when circumstances demanded it. "Mom?" Emma asked as they prepared for bed. "When I'm older, will you tell me the whole story about great-grandfather?" Maya looked at her daughter, 8 years old, curious, unafraid of complexity or moral ambiguity. Emma would grow up knowing that her family's history included both trauma and triumph, that sometimes the people who loved you made difficult choices to protect futures they'd never lived to see. "When you're older," Maya promised, "I'll tell you everything." That night, Maya fell asleep in her own bed for the first time in 3 weeks, her daughter safe in the next room, her grandfather's burden finally transformed into a legacy Emma could inherit with pride rather than fear. The storage unit paintings watched over them like guardians, their amateur brushstrokes holding space for all the stories that had finally found their way home. The new beginning. 6 months after the mountain confrontation, Maya stood before her new classroom at Portland Community College, watching adult students arrange their easels in preparation for her art history and social justice course. The morning light streaming through tall windows illuminated canvases that would soon hold more than paint. They would hold stories, perspectives, and healing. "Today we're beginning with art as preservation," Maya announced, gesturing toward a reproduction of a Marc Chagall painting she'd mounted beside her grandfather's amateur landscape, the one that had started everything. How do ordinary people use creative expression to protect what matters most? Among her students sat Elena Volkov, the legitimate Holocaust survivor Maya had met through Agent Torres's victim assistance program. Elena's presence in the class represented something Maya was still learning to navigate, the complexity of justice that healed rather than simply punished. Marcus Volkov was serving federal prison time for fraud and extortion, but his elderly aunt Elena had lost her life savings to his fabricated recovery scheme. "Professor Chen," Elena raised her hand, her accent carrying dignity despite the financial devastation her nephew had caused. "When my family lost everything in Poland, my mother saved one photograph by sewing it into her coat lining. Is this what you mean by preservation?" Maya nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in her throat that came when abstract concepts became intensely personal. "Exactly. Sometimes the most powerful preservation happens in hidden spaces, waiting for the right moment to emerge." After class, Maya found Elena lingering near the Chagall reproduction, her expression thoughtful. "Your grandfather's painting. It reminds me of the village where my mother grew up, before the war. Emma thinks it looks like the mountains where I found the truth about our family," Maya replied. "Maybe good art captures something universal about hope surviving darkness." Elena smiled, the expression transforming her weathered features. "Your daughter sounds wise. She's teaching me that healing doesn't require forgetting. It requires understanding." That afternoon, Maya drove to the Columbia River Gorge, where Aaron Goldstein was installing a memorial plaque near the hiking trail that led toward her grandfather's hidden well. The bronze inscription read, "In memory of David Chen and all who chose courage over comfort, justice over safety." Their preservation of hope across generations reminds us that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary good. "The scholarship fund reached full endowment yesterday," Aaron reported as they stood beside the memorial. 12 families, 12 educational opportunities for refugee children. Herman would have loved knowing his suffering created someone else's possibilities. Maya touched the plaque's warm surface, thinking about inheritance and transformation. Her grandfather's amateur paintings now hung in her apartment, not as valuable art, but as reminders that significance often disguised itself as ordinary until circumstances revealed its true purpose. "How's Samuel adjusting to all the attention?" Maya asked, knowing the retired investigator had reluctantly accepted recognition from the International Commission on Holocaust-era insurance claims for his decades of unpaid research. "He's overwhelmed by the number of families contacting him for help. Apparently, word spreads quickly in communities that have been waiting 70 years for answers." Aaron paused, studying the memorial inscription. "He asked me to tell you that courage is contagious, that your willingness to risk everything for truth has inspired other people to come forward with their own preserved evidence." The revelation both humbled and energized Maya. Her 3-day journey into family secrets had somehow become part of a larger movement toward historical accountability. Fear and silence were finally giving way to documentation and acknowledgement. That evening, Emma helped Maya prepare dinner while chattering about her school's upcoming Heritage Day presentation. I want to tell everyone about great-grandfather David and how he saved people's treasures during the war. Mrs. Patterson said I can bring one of his paintings for the display. Maya paused in chopping vegetables, struck by how naturally Emma had integrated their family's complex history into her understanding of identity. No fear, no shame, just pride in ancestry that included both struggle and righteousness. "Which painting do you want to bring?" Maya asked. "The mountain one, because it shows that sometimes the most important things are hidden until you're ready to find them." After dinner, Maya sat at her kitchen table grading student essays about art as resistance, while Emma worked on homework nearby. The comfortable domesticity felt miraculous after months of inherited anxiety and life-threatening revelations. Normal had been reconstructed on foundations of truth rather than protective silence. Agent Torres called just as Emma was going to bed, her voice carrying the satisfaction of bureaucratic progress finally achieved. "Final distribution ceremony is scheduled for next month. All 12 families confirmed. Your grandfather's documentation made the difference between hope and actual recovery for people who never thought they'd live to see justice." Maya looked around her small apartment, amateur paintings on the walls, Emma's art supplies scattered across the coffee table, textbooks marking her transition from part-time survival to meaningful profession. The storage unit purchase that had nearly bankrupted her had instead funded her transformation into someone who could help others navigate the intersection of history and healing. "Thank you," Maya told Torres, though the gratitude extended far beyond federal assistance. It encompassed every choice that had led her to this moment of peace, earned through courage rather than inherited through accident. Outside, Portland rain drummed against the windows with the same rhythm that had accompanied her desperate storage unit purchase 6 months earlier. But now the sound carried promise rather than desperation, rhythm rather than chaos. Maya Chen had finally come home to herself.